Well, thank you all for coming today. I'd like to introduce you to the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus Chancellor, Don Ellman.
Thank you very much. The people who deserve the applause are the ones that are coming up after me, not me. Good evening and welcome to the first of our Transforming Healthcare lecture series for 2025. As Neil said, I'm Don Ellman, and I have the honor of being the Chancellor of the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. And I mean it's an honor. It's a privilege to have my job, and I'm blessed to be surrounded by some of the people that you're going to be talking or hearing from this evening. And before we get started, I do want to recognize some special guests. We have Gabe Martinez here representing Senator Michael Bennet from Michael Bennet's office. Gabe, if you're here. We have Alicia Gonzalez and Grace Eddy here on behalf of Congressman Gabe Evans, who represents Colorado's 8th District. Let's see if I can get that out. We launched this series 9 years ago with the idea of bringing our community together with leading experts in fields where we are trying to shape healthcare and medicine in the state and around the nation. And tonight we turn our subject to a vital topic, military medicine and the mind. We'll hear from outstanding faculty whose work bridges battlefield research and civilian care. At Anschutz, we're quite literally built for this work. I think, as most of you know, we're standing on the grounds of the former Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center, and our ties to the military and veteran community run very, very deep. Today, we are home to 6 professional schools, over 60 centers and institutes, and 2 nationally ranked hospitals with UC Health and Children's University Hospital and Children's Colorado Hospital. And we're fortunate to have the Rocky Mountain VA Medical Center and the State Veterans Home flanking our campus as our neighbors. Together, these institutions combine for a robust ecosystem for advancing veteran and military health. And tonight we'll hear about some of the latest discoveries and treatment options in traumatic brain injury, emergency medicine, suicide prevention, and PTSD. We'll also introduce 2 of our flagship institutions, the Marcus Institute for Brain Health and the Center for Combat Medicine and Battlefield Research, both national models for innovation. So now it's my pleasure to introduce a driving force, and when I say a driving force, I mean a driving force behind much of this work, Dr. Vic Bobarda. Vic is professor and interim chair of emergency medicine at the CU School of Medicine. He's the founding director of the Center for Combat Medicine and Battlefield Research, and is a strategic leader for the Marcus Institute for Brain Health. Without further ado, Vic Bobarda.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Great crowd here. As Don said, one of the biggest crowds we've had. And there's actually a waiting list to get in. So I hope they let all of you all in today, which is fantastic to have for this evening. Really, it's a great chance for us to show how we are transforming healthcare to benefiting our community from the point of injury all the way back, from the leading edge to our community. Really appreciate Chancellor Ellman allowing us to show what we're doing for our communities as well. Today, we're going to have a power-packed session of several speakers who are going to talk about how they research at the tip of the spear in very plain language how we benefit your communities here as well. So I'll start off first, and I come from a military family. My wife is here, Corey, who's my spouse. We all know a military family spouse is so important. My daughter is here as well, Grace, who's an aspiring physician. And we also, military is a family business for us. My son, Owen, is here too. He's got a nomination and appointment to the Air Force Academy, and will be going there in 15 days from today. So we're proud of him. So for me, where I got here, and then as we start the story, comes from the time I was in Iraq, back in Balad, Iraq, 2005. Back then, that was the busiest time in the Iraq War, busiest time since the Vietnam War. Some colleagues of mine are here today. Dr. Talarczyk, who's actually the Chief of Service to the VA, we're here together. And it was the busiest time since the Vietnam War, the biggest trauma hospital since then, the bedrock of our combat innovations, and really the genesis for many of the healthcare leaders we have in the country today. In that photograph, 3 of those folks are now vice presidents of healthcare systems in the United States based on the time they spent in Iraq. But at that time, I took care of a Sergeant Martinez that came there. He had been exposed to an explosion, an IED, up through his vehicle, through his Humvee. And when he had that injury, they brought him into our 10th hospital you see on the picture, and we looked at him over and said, hey, you look fine. No holes, no bleeding. Go back on patrol. Send him back out to the latrine. 10 minutes later, his battle buddy brings him back in. Battle buddy said, hey, he's confused. He's kind of malingering. He's got no injuries. What do you guys want to do, Doc? So we looked him over and said, your eardrums were blown out. Looks like you may actually have a brain injury. At that moment, traumatic brain injury from explosions and blasts was not a thing. We wrote the first paper that got accepted to the New England Journal of Medicine on traumatic brain injury. At that point, I realized that I wanted to use research to change lives, and that's how I'm going to do that. The second story was a year later, back in Balad, Iraq as well, and this person, Sergeant First Class Alvin Cash, was one of the patients I took care of. If that name sounds familiar, I'll remind you why in a moment. So Sergeant First Class Cash, Sergeant Cash, was in this Bradley fighting vehicle with his other soldiers when they also got hit by an explosion IED. He climbed out of the turret of the Bradley, was uninjured. He went back in, pulled out each one of these other soldiers, and now he had 80% burns. When medevac came to pick him up, he waved them off. He said, I don't need you, pick up these other guys first. He told me his story, I took care of him, I talked to his commander. His other soldiers made it, he did not. And he was recognized for his heroism by the Medal of Honor by the President of the United States in December 2021. The story of him brought to me 2 specific things. One, his heroism, I could never do, I couldn't imagine. But secondly, because of him and his other soldiers that we took care of, we ended up rewriting all the books of burn care. We changed the practice of how patients are taken care of for burn care for the entire country and world. And to me, yes, I want to change lives, but this led me to change practice as well, not just lives. And the third story, in short note, is this. When we were there, I got to meet with a lot of very high-level folks, routinely. This one in particular is the Secretary Gates, the Secretary of Defense at the time. But 14 congressmen and women later, 8 senators, 4 cabinet members, 2 secretaries of the Air Force, a vice president, and many other VIPs there, I realized not only did I want to change lives, but also change practice. And Secretary of Defense Gates said, you can also change the world in what you do. So it motivated me to go to a place when I left active duty to do that. And that's here. So in Colorado is a military state. There's 7 military bases, 45 minutes from here. The Special Forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, Marines, all in the state. There's 380,000 veterans, 38,000 active duty, 90,000 family members and spouses here as well. Commonly rated as the #1 place for veterans, especially Colorado Springs as well. And the most flag officers or admirals per capita than any other state. So we're pretty proud of that too. So this state really is focused on military and veterans, and there's no better place in the state than the campus. As the Chancellor talked about, the Fitzsimmons Medical Center is historic as a legacy of military medical innovation, this particular campus. And December 8th, 1941, December 8th, the day after Pearl Harbor, Fitzsimmons Medical Center, the hospital on this campus, became the busiest hospital in the world. They became known for taking all the casualties from Pearl Harbor, 3,000 patients, beds at one time. They were at prominence of the country, if not the world, on rehab, wound care, brain injury, shell shock, as they called it. And that legacy continued, which is why President Eisenhower was taken here. President Nixon, President Johnson were here. John Kerry was born here. All these leaders came through, and the history and the legacy of the military is important for this campus, as the chancellor highlighted before. And these dreams that come to life is why I came here as well, because there's no better place where we can do cutting-edge research, we can work with students and train them with the future leaders to be in military medicine or just plain medicine as well, and engaging our community to make sure we're taking care of those folks, training them. Folks are our first responders in the community, our police officers as well, as part of the Combat Center and the Marcus Institute for Brain Health. So there's two things that you're going to hear about tonight. Primarily, you're going to hear about military innovation and civilian impact. You're going to hear about two programs with one mission. The Center for Combat Research, which I'll tell you about, and then the Marcus Institute for Brain Health, where General Flaherty will talk to you about after me. So the Center for Combat Research. So our focus is to save lives in the battlefield and back home. And back home means in our backyard, in Colorado, in Aurora, in South Denver. Whatever we learn, whether you're being picked up by Medevac and a Black Hawk in war, or coming back and being picked up by Lifeline from UC Health near Eagle County, we want to make sure the diagnostics, the treatment, the therapies, the expertise are the same. The continuum between war and our communities, that care is the same for both, to benefit both sides. The three pillars that we work on are: one is pre-hospital and emergency care. So working on first responders, what they need in every way. How do they train? Are they resilient? Are there other challenges that Dr. Stanley will talk to you about? The second is when you get to a hospital here, for Anschutz Hospital, for example, for critical injury and illness, burns, bleeding, amputations, wound care. How can we optimize that? And the third will be around mental health and TBI, traumatic brain injury. Those are our three pillars for the center that we focus on to take care of folks. And in 5 years here, we've been a global leader, working with military scientists, civilian scientists, getting industry leaders engaged as well to move fast, and also our world-class trials network you'll hear about today, too, and it's growing, to benefit the Department of Defense as well as the rest of our civilian community. In 5 years, folks have said that at the very high level in Congress that we have done more for this community than in 5 years any hospital or community or university has done in 50 years. Leapfrogging Hopkins and Harvard and Mayo and Stanford and Texas and all the other more well-known universities, and we're very proud of that moment. So once again, now we are the destination for military medical innovation. From December 8th, 1941 to today, this is where they come. This is where they come to learn about how we do military medical innovation quickly and get it out in the community. Like for example, Dr. Libby helped us lead this research symposium, the elite research symposium in this room. We brought together startup entrepreneurs, healthcare executives, innovation leaders, general officers and admirals, researchers, and combat medics together for warfighter solutions and moving it into policy and practice. Our main goal is to go from the battlefield to back home, turning military medical gains to better health care for everybody. Everybody through practice changes, policy changes, and bedside solutions that we can use in our hospitals and communities here as well. Now, we also move fast with military fortitude, looking at innovation, speed, and precision. Agile development, so working with our frontline folks with rapid prototyping and feedback from our medics and docs. Using that military medicine for civilian impact, translating those military breakthroughs into better health care and patient-centered care for everybody. And very focused on the front line, going to the combat medics, first responders, ER docs, trauma surgeons, trauma nurses. What is your problem that we can solve and we can work on together? Resourced by the DoD or our community leaders. And taking that finally through data and digital health so that we can move faster and smarter with telehealth, with AI, with remote patient monitoring, and with other AI diagnostics as well. And then moving that from vision all the way to delivery, taking those nice concepts and making them real solutions that we can use from our warfighters and our community. Advanced clinical research platforms for prolonged casualty care, as we call it, or rural care, rural Colorado, for acute care and trauma. Taking those bioengineering solutions for different wearables and wearable devices you'll hear about today, or bioengineering solutions that can help wounds heal. And then bioinformatics, looking at AI solutions, artificial intelligence, and algorithms that actually save lives. And finally, for extreme environments as well. Cold weather, Arctic, is a wartime need, as well as altitude. It's also a combat need and a Colorado need. We have folks who get frostbite and cold weather exposures at altitude and at cold weather as well. Makes us very unique in the country. And this is the beginning. So you're going to hear from 4 wonderful speakers tonight that are going to talk from the tip of the spear in very plain language about some very specific things where they are changing what is possible for military medicine. After me, General Flaherty will talk about transforming trauma. She'll talk about brain injury specifically in the Marcus Institute, taking 42 years of service. She's one of the first women to go to Army Airborne School and one of the first women combatant commanders for the Air Force. Dr. Hebert will talk about brain injury in a way that's very common to understand and what we're doing to innovate that, TBI and brain health here. Dr. Stanley then will talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and mental health care, and using digital solutions and data to solve that's scalable and sustainable and adaptable to our populations. And finally, Dr. Ginde will end with talking about his personal story in engaging from the battlefield and back home as a civilian researcher, focusing science on a mission and serving something greater. So I hope you enjoy the next little bit with these speakers. They're fantastic, world-class speakers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. General Flaherty.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Great. As Vic said, I'm Kathleen Flaherty. I'm the Executive Director of the Marcus Institute for Brain Health and co-founder, along with Vic Babarda, of the Center for Combat Research and Professor in Emergency Medicine. I am so honored and thrilled to be here tonight to talk to you and share a little bit about our journey. I have served, as Vic said, almost 42 years. I was 41 and 8 months. No, I'm just kidding. Close enough. In 4 decades. I started when I was 12, so that helped. I was actually 17, and I was an Army combat medic, and that's me at Army Airborne School, as he mentioned, one of the early women that got to do that opportunity. And I retired as an Air Force general. So in that 40 years plus span, I learned a lot. And I had multiple deployments, including Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Iraq, Afghanistan. Vic and I were in Iraq at the same time in 2003. And so that's when I first identified, again, like Vic, the traumatic brain injuries that we really didn't know much about. I've also had multiple commands. One, I got to start the brand new Air Medical Evacuation Squadron at Peterson Air Force Base. And then this picture was in Bagram, Afghanistan during the height of the conflict. I was responsible for the critical care air transport teams as well as air medical evacuation teams. And I also flew a lot of combat missions at the time. So because of this, I have a special interest in the invisible wound of traumatic brain injuries. And traumatic brain injuries is not just a battlefield injury. 2.8 million Americans suffer a traumatic brain injury every year. And that can be from a motor vehicle crash. It can be from contact sports. It can be from falling on ice. And so a traumatic brain injury, also known as a TBI, is a disruption in normal brain function, and that's from an external force. And so, for example, if you're in a car crash and you get rear-ended, and I think of the brain like a really thick jello. And as that thick jello, as you get rear-ended, your head goes forward, so your brain bonks on the front. And then as it slows, it bonks on the back. So all those injuries, if you think about what that brain is doing inside the skull, it can be twisting the neurons, the little nerve cells, if you will, twisting them, stretching them, and even tearing them. And it can have a profound impact on these lives. And when you think about mild to severe, so they're all labeled mild to severe, but I think when it goes to mild, it talks about what happens at the time of the impact. So the time of the impact is how long was your loss of consciousness? Do you have post-traumatic amnesia? So you have those pieces, but I will say it's very often mislabeled and misidentified, because I have friends who have served and they've had more severe brain injury and they're totally fine. And I know hundreds of people who have a mild traumatic brain injury and suffer every single day, every single hour. So it can affect cognition, mood, memory, and physical functioning. For far too long, traumatic brain injuries have been misunderstood and poorly treated. And often they've been misdiagnosed as mental health issues because a lot of the symptoms that occur from a traumatic brain injury are similar to post-traumatic stress. So it's not uncommon to have irritability and anger issues, low frustration tolerance, difficulty in crowds because you get that overstimulation that Dr. Hebert's going to talk about, and the emotional regulation that Dr. Stanley is going to talk about. So it's not uncommon for many, many military members, first responders, including EMS and fire, that gets missed, right? And that can cause tremendous loss of quality of life. So not all battles happen at war. I want to share a little bit about Maddie's story. Maddie, who's in the audience today, is an amazing young woman. She is determined, she's fierce, she has a spark, and she has a spirit. And she wanted to serve her nation, her great nation, as a military officer. And so she applied for, was accepted, and excelled at West Point. She was on a career trajectory that was unparalleled. She was a high-performing officer. When she was stationed in Korea, she was lauded by her supervisors and generals for the work that she's doing and the potential and promise that she had to serve this great nation. Her next assignment was in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And part of her duties included teaching close combat training. And during close combat training, she received a blow to the head that resulted in a traumatic brain injury. And it's not unusual for our veterans and our military members to get what's called institutional betrayal because she had these magnitude of symptoms. She was not properly assessed or treated, and her leadership did not support her and called her a bad soldier, and she was medically discharged from the Army. And that's not uncommon because we'll talk about a minute the symptoms and how it's hard to do your function. And we'll end with Maddie's story in a minute. So I'm talking a lot about military, but everything, as Vic said, that we learn in military practice, we apply to our communities and to our families. So whatever we learn in that practice will go across the board. So mild traumatic brain injuries have been known as the signature injury for Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of that has to do with blast injuries. And we now finally have an appreciation for what that applies and why it's so important. And I also want you to think of, when I talk about these repetitive blast injury, you can get these repetitive injuries from contact sports, you can get these repetitive from other arenas where you get multiple smaller levels of TBI. So with military weapons in both training and combat, there's big artillery, there's mortars, grenades, there's shoulder-fired weapons.
The coolest thing about my job is definitely blowing stuff up.
It's like a wave of energy just rolling over you.
So one of the things that we know is that people don't have that one big diagnostic TBI. And you can see in this picture here, these are just training. They're just blowing up practice. And it's called reps and sets. To be good at it, you have to train like you fight. You have to be exposed to these to go downrange. You don't want the first time you're firing a weapon to be downrange. You don't want the first time you're going in to breach a room and clear a room to be downrange. So it's very important that we do train like we fight. We just need to figure out ways to protect our heroes by mitigating and protecting. And we have so much better science that we do now than we did before, but it's on its infancy. And the issue with it is these soldiers, sailor, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, they don't have that one big diagnostic TBI, so everybody's, you're fine, it's PTS, it's something wrong with you, it's all of those things. Not recognizing, like the research that we're doing through the Center for Combat Research, this cumulative low-level blastering training will give you a TBI. Those big mortars, that will give you a TBI, because this is what happens inside
When a weapon is fired, it creates an explosion that produces a wave of energy. It's a high-pressure pulse which passes through the whole body, including the brain. The effects of high-level blast exposure are more obvious, but scientists have now found repeated exposures to blasts, even at lower levels, could lead to mild traumatic brain injury, or MTBI.
So we know that they're suffering and we know they're out there. And so there's things that we can do about it, and we need more science, and that's why we're here. This is an interesting study in 2023 that looked at TBIs, comorbidities of traumatic brain injuries 2 years after their exposure. This is in about 50,000 active duty and reserve personnel. 2 years after their TBI, and 89% of these in this study were mild TBIs. So the majority still had cognitive issues, sleep issues, post-traumatic stress issues, emotional issues, and anxiety disorders. And Dr. Stanley is going to talk about this, but we know that TBIs alone are independent risk factor for anxiety, depression, PTS, and independent risk factor for suicide. So getting after TBIs is going to help with that, and so that's why we partner so much. One of the challenges of having an invisible wound, which PTS is one and head injury is I look fine, right? None of you would know that I've had a bad traumatic brain injury, right? Because I'm presenting. But what you don't understand is that bottom right hand, that I also have cognitive fatigue. I can only perform for a short period of time, that I have vestibular and ocular motor, that I can't go shopping without it being an event because I get overstimulated. So all of these things is missed, and when we look at them, I'll just say give them a little grace because we don't know. And if you think about Maddie, and they can put their finger on that she had a TBI, they just know that she's having problem solving, time management issues, cognitive flexibility, learning issues, memory, motivation. All of these can profoundly affect a person with a TBI. And I call it a life-altering functional disability because you can't see it, right? I'm still doing enough stuff that you don't know, right? And then the emotional toll, as I mentioned. It's not uncommon to have associated psychological health issues with the TBI because you can't do the things you wanted to do before. So there is an interrelationship. So giving new hope to TBI recovery. That's what we do at the Marcus Institute for Brain Health on campus with great CU support and the Chancellor's support of that. And that's for active duty and currently serving, so active guard and reserve, veterans, first responders. So EMS, fire, police are welcome to come. And thanks to philanthropic support, patients can focus on recovery, not the costs. We cover the 3-day assessment, and which is a really great evaluation. And people will say, you know, I got in that 3-day evaluation what I didn't get in 30 years. These are Vietnam vets that you validated that it's not just in my head, there's something wrong and you can help me. The 3-week intensive outpatient program where they live here on campus with us. So Maddie spent 4 weeks with us here on campus. We pay for their flight and all the associated costs. They live on campus in the old officers' housing. We give them nutritious, we stock the house that they all live in together with nutritious brain optimizing foods that they learn how to cook and take care of their brain. So it's a specialized, co-located, integrated team. So we have 13 specialists, a lot that are in this room right now that you can talk to after, that provide all these services in one location for all these deserving nation's heroes and to get them going. So at the Marcus Institute for Brain Health, we don't just treat the symptoms. We treat the whole person. And that's physically, cognitive, and emotionally with all these high-performing, specialized care. So Maddie's story. So Maddie's mom, Jill, was searching. She was searching because Maddie was hopeless and suicidal and a loss of her life plan, everything that she had worked up to that point. And she found the Marcus Institute for Brain Health. So Maddie had spent 4 weeks with us and found hope. She found a team that believed in her. She found the trajectory towards recovery, and she recently applied to UCCS. She'll be going to their in the fall to get her licensed social worker degree, and she wants to come back and work for MIBH. So, yay! Maddie, if you could stand up and wave. And she's got her dog Tigger too. Yeah. So one of the things we teach at the Marcus Institute for Brain Health is really the wellness practices, the whole person concept that they really can heal cognitively, physically, and emotionally. So courage takes vulnerability, and you can go from trauma to resiliency and then that post-traumatic growth to learn how it's okay to give myself grace, it's okay to ask for help, and then take it. It's not a chink in your armor, it's not a weakness. Thank you for your time and attention. There's people from the Marcus Institute here, you can tell. And so next, innovative trauma brain research with Dr. Jeff Hebert. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for sharing your evening with all of us. We are very excited. And as the Director of Research at MIBH and the investigator, or a investigator at the CU Center for Combat Research, I am delighted and honored to share with you a portion of our research portfolio that focuses primarily on the emotional, cognitive, and physical triad. So we'll start with a bit of background of a very important neurological concept and process called top-down, bottom-up. It is the foundation of the fidelity of the triad. And before we get into actually talking about our research that targets some of the TBI-mediated causes of the dysregulation of that triad. So we're literally going to start from the bottom up. So bottom up means that the brain, our brains are taking in information. Right now, you see me up here, so our vision is taking in information. You may hear me through your ears, but there's also an inner ear function that provides balance, which is the vestibular system. It's how I can actually be up here standing and hopefully not pacing too much, but being able to be stable. For the feeling through our entire body, every aspect comes through into the brain from the bottom up, including pain. And then smell, so olfactory system. So all of those is something that the brain has to be able to process simultaneously on a regular basis, at home, in different environments. And that could be a reaction for you to survive. This is a very simple thing. It's a primal action that seeing something, hearing something, smelling something, you could act immediately. That's part of the brain called the limbic system that as it comes up, gets processed and immediately can respond. It can be very helpful, especially in a trained operator or a trained individual or any civilian, that we are able to potentially walk without thinking. We can do things without thinking. However, in a more complex environment, we do have to shoot that up to our more newer cortex called the neocortex. And that's where it gets processed at a higher level so we can make better decisions about our actions. However, it does not come without some challenges. However, it is where we can actually control some of our tasks in a busy environment. It's how we make decisions and how we develop cognition. All of that is something that occurs to us all day long. And part of the cognition is so that we can remember being in that novel environment, we'll remember how to act the next time. But again, remember, it comes with challenges. So as that information is coming in, it can be very distracting. So that whole vision squirrel, you see something, you got to look at it. Hearing, something's loud, squirrel moment. But also the brain has to determine what do I actually bring in that's purposeful, that should be relevant to the task that I'm doing, or it's not, so it's gating in and out. And then many times in a very busy environment, more sensory information over a prolonged period of time, it starts to crowd in onto the brain, and that's where we get multisensory flooding. This can occur across many different arenas, including military space, civilian space, different degrees, different types, but it occurs in any human. What makes that even worse is TBI. So I'd like to share with you 3 of our studies that's focusing primarily on the emotion, cognitive, and physical triad. And it's funded in 3 different ways: DoD and a local Komen Institute Foundation fund. So the first one, we only have about 6 participants left to complete this data set, and we're looking at the contributing factors to irritability in veterans with prior TBI versus veterans with no prior TBI, chronically. On average, they're about 10 years since their most recent event. So we're looking at this from the bottom up. Bottom up being balanced. So we have computerized technology that can actually quantify the ability to balance. Again, that vestibular concept, that inner ear gyroscope. The participants are also challenged in how they process auditory information. One is being able to hear speech in background babble noise. So they listen to, on the headphones, a speech, an actual spoken words, and then they have to repeat that, but it gets harder because it's like a restaurant. And then we're using magneto and electric encephalography, which is a fancy name of we're measuring the activity of brain, while there's beeps and tones that are produced as passively, and we're measuring how the brain is actually registering that and gating and or processing it, and then pain. And we're comparing that between the 2 groups, but then we're also associated to chronic irritability. And right now, the interim analysis looks like primarily pain and auditory processing might be the leading contributing factors to chronic irritability and discontrol of emotions in military veterans with prior concussion history. We're also taking this to the next level, being able to identify neurobiological factors, better known as the brain, and how it's being processed. So what you're looking at here on the right side of the screen is the front part of the brain of one of our participants, and the back side of the brain on your left side. In the center, the colored area in the right, in the red, is that thalamus area where the information comes up in the limbic system, and then, remember, going up to the higher cortices. So what we're doing is we're trying to determine what might be contributing factors of the brain in this prolonged irritability concept. And that data is going to take a while to process. We're moving into also identifying the cognitive and visual axes in the similar type of group comparisons, where the participants are doing computerized rapid naming testing, where they actually have to read on a screen numbers as fast as they can, and they get scored on that. And then we have a test where, remember that visual squirrel moment? It's called an anti-saccade. Can you suppress the squirrel in your vision? It's been found quite readily in schizophrenia, social anxiety, not as readily in TBI. So there's a visual fixation cross that the participant looks at, and then it goes away, and X stimulus comes up, and they're instructed, don't look at it, look at the other way. Completely opposite of intuition, but look the other way. And it goes through different iterations randomly, either left side or right side stimulus, but look the opposite way. So what we're finding in our early analyses, and a manuscript is in review right now, is that those tests are different in the different groups, worse in prior concussion history veterans, but then also that it's related to language fluency, verbal fluency, impulsivity, attention is what we hypothesized, and that's what we're reporting on. We're also doing similar imaging of the brain, and also from that thalamus, looking at radiations to the back of the brain, again, that higher order command center called the visual cortex, Brodmann's area 17, and the radiations that come from that thalamus, and we'll identify what might be some of the neurobiological factors. So now we're moving into how can we start to compensate, help the veterans with prior concussion history actually function in society, and maybe work with some of that visual flooding that occurs in busy environments. So our partners at CU Boulder, Computer Science Engineering Department, we're looking at the phase 1 study of visual cancellation, analogous to auditory headphone cancellation system. We're seeing if we can build a model that in certain areas, I'm going to play a video that this could be any video of any of our patients with prior concussion history. It's a video from a well-known movie, The Hurt Locker. Jeremy Renner's character comes back from deployment, tries to reintegrate into society with his family at the grocery store. His wife says, "Get some cereal, the kid's hungry." So he goes down a cereal aisle. I'm sure we all experience this a little bit. With a prior concussion history, it's overwhelming. It's flooding. It's confusing. His visual confusion, his cognitive confusion starts to set in. He gets frustrated. He leaves. He picks up any cereal. It might not be the Frosted Flakes that the kid wanted, but we're trying to build technology that can we help isolate the Frosted Flakes, cancel out the confusion, and that's where we're headed with that study in phase 1. We're building that right now. So it's my hope that I gave you a bit of a glimpse on our current directives and what we're working on and targeting the concepts of the emotion, cognitive, and physical triad. But it's that foundation of what's contributing to those that will allow us to design and test more precise therapies for all persons with prior TBI. Thanks so much. So my colleague and good friend, Dr. Stanley, is going to now talk about his awesome work.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening, and Chancellor Elliman, thank you for the honor of hosting our centers here. My name is Ian Stanley. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have the pleasure of working as the psychological health lead for the Center for Combat Research, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine. This question, in many ways, drives my career and motivates the work that we do at the Center for Combat Research related to psychological health and suicide prevention. What do you do when the toughest warrior, when the toughest soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, guardian, or civilian first responder, what do you do when they say, "I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to see this battle through"? And here, the battle, of course, is the battle within. Historically, military service members have had rates of suicide that have been lower than the general population, but there's been a shift. I'm showing here data from 2007. 2007 was around the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. As expected, most of the fatalities, tragic fatalities to be sure, were combat related. Hostile action, accidents, whether they're training accidents or other accidents. 211 service members that year died by suicide. And I want to mention, because there's implications for prevention that I'll talk about, most of those suicides happened at home during dwell time between deployments for folks who were never deployed. Very few of those suicides happened in theater in the combat zone. Fast forward now nearly 20 years, and things have shifted. Service members have experienced a 50% increase in the number of suicide deaths per year. Over the last nearly 20 years, there's been a slow increase in both the rate and the number per year of individuals in the military who die by suicide. Suicide is now, as you can see here, the leading cause of death among military service members, and that's why it is one of the focus areas of the Center for Combat Research that we're doggedly pursuing, and I'm very pleased to share some of that work with you this evening. We focus on a few areas. There's 2 paths to suicide prevention I'm going to share with you tonight. One is promoting secure home environments, or secure environments in general, often through the promotion of secure storage of personally owned firearms. We also focus on reducing risk factors such as PTSD or TBI, or sleep disturbances, or problematic alcohol use, and bolstering protective factors. I want to be clear, although we're talking about suicide prevention and PTSD and TBI, most service members live happy, healthy, productive lives. And so how do we harness the knowledge learned from them as well to bolster and enhance psychological health for all in the military, in our first responder communities here in Colorado and nationally, and our broader communities as well. Why do we focus on the secure storage of firearms? Among individuals who die by suicide, the majority in the general population, a little over 50% of individuals use a firearm to enact their death. Among military populations, that proportion balloons to approximately 75%. And these are not military-issued firearms, these are personally owned firearms, again, with implications for prevention. We know that delaying access to a firearm for individuals at elevated risk can prevent a tragedy. This isn't just, I mentioned I'm a clinical psychologist. I talk with my patients about firearm secure storage. It's not just coming from me, though. It's not just coming from the Department of Defense. It is, to be sure. It's also coming from the firearm community. So our firearm businesses, firearm manufacturers, trade associations, and the owners themselves. We're fortunate on campus to have the Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative led by close colleague and friend, Dr. Emmy Betts. I work with Dr. Betts on a program that she founded called Pause to Protect. This is a national program founded and started here on CU Anschutz campus to promote secure storage in collaboration with firearm businesses across the US, near military installations. What we're doing is we're partnering with 5 civilian-owned firearm businesses at each of these 10 to start, and we're hoping to expand, bases representing all the services from the Joint Base up in Alaska to the Naval Air Station down in Jacksonville, providing these businesses with resources, with technical assistance, with stipends to deliver either discounted or free locking devices to service members, their families, veterans, and first responders in those communities. For Pause to Protect, there's a website with all the resources that we share with the businesses. There's also a collection of really powerful videos from folks on the ground doing this work. There's a brief clip I want to show you right now with a few individuals. One of them is the president of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the largest trade association for firearms. Another individual you'll hear from is the chief marketing officer of Sig Sauer, a major firearm manufacturer, which you might be tracking has the largest contract, DoD contract for handguns, all with the same shared message that secure storage saves lives.
The fact is, if we can promote secure storage and have people securely store their guns when they're not being used, it does create a safer community for everyone.
It's really important that this discussion about safe gun storage gets elevated because the issues at hand are becoming more significant over time.
Firearm owners, by and large, are responsible people. They understand the responsibility of owning a firearm, and they take that responsibility very seriously.
And we have almost 4,000 employees, and not to mention the fact that we're providing firearms to soldiers, police officers, security forces in the US and all over the world. And so I think the importance of having a responsible position for safe gun storage is very important.
I don't want to watch the news and think that because someone didn't buy a $40, $50, $60 safe, that now this family is going to go through 40, 50, 60 years of trauma.
The more that we contribute to the positive message of secure storage and we get gun owners to act on that, the better it is for the community as a whole.
Pretty powerful. Again, Pause to Protect is a program developed here on campus now with national impact. Those leaders in those videos we bring to campus each year, along with leaders from the Department of Defense, the different suicide prevention programs within the DoD, the different psychological health directors within DoD, leaders from the VA, leaders from our local government, leaders from our local community, our local fire EMS agencies, bring them together to discuss how do we develop bold, actionable solutions to address firearm suicide and suicide in general in these communities. Pause to Protect it was talked about and is an outcome of this meeting, as are deliverables that reach the highest level of the Department of Defense. The thought leadership from this summit has impacted DoD policy, instruction, and listed here is one example. This is a memo that the Secretary of Defense sends out each year around the holiday time, services-wide. It says things like, have a great holiday season, make sure you stay safe, don't drink and drive, wear a seatbelt, remember safety first, take care of each other. For the first time a few years ago, and again, a direct result from the thought leadership at the summit that we host here on campus, the Secretary of Defense added text around encouraging individuals to securely store both medications and firearms, recognizing that doing so can be life-saving, not just for the service member, but for the family with whom they might live and the broader community. I lead a couple clinical trials. One of them is focused on PTSD prevention. This is a trial where we're recruiting soldiers who are experiencing both PTSD and thoughts of suicide, who have been psychiatrically hospitalized at a military treatment facility. As part of the intervention, we asked folks to reflect on what brought them to the hospital. How did they get here? Why now? About 3 weeks ago now, there was a soldier who was hospitalized and enrolled in our study who had shared with us that in the middle of the night, he woke up in a suicidal despair. He had walked from his bedroom to the closet to open up the gun safe with the intention of using the gun inside to end his life. The gun safe that he uses has a digital keypad on it. It makes beeps. His wife heard him opening up the gun safe, allowed her to intervene, get him to the hospital, keep him alive, help him flourish. To be sure, the wife saved his life, that's for sure, and the extra time and space that it took for the individual to try to gain access to the firearm while in a suicidal crisis also saved his life, that's for sure. We care deeply about prevention. We also care deeply, as you heard from Dr. Flaherty and Dr. Hebert, about healing. We focus on developing novel treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder, both in our military communities and our first responder communities. Focus on developing novel digital treatments for sleep disturbances, nightmares, insomnia, and problematic anger as well. I'm going to share with you a digital solution that we're testing right now here in Colorado on problematic anger. The reason being that it affects 1 in 5 service members and has really grave consequences, not just for job functioning, but relationship functioning as well. And I should mention too that problematic anger not exclusively, but disproportionately affects men. There's a digital health platform called Man Therapy. You can find it online, it's publicly accessible at mantherapy.org. It was developed by two companies here in Colorado, Cactus and Grit Digital Health, with initial resourcing from the Anschutz Foundation. They developed this digital solution to circumvent traditional barriers that many men, not all, many men experience to accessing care. And they do so by using humor, non-traditional approaches that you can see some of that humor here. The platform was tested in a civilian sector, found to be really helpful in encouraging folks to access traditional mental health resources, and also really helpful in decreasing symptom burden, decreasing post-traumatic stress symptoms, decreasing depression. The DoD came to us and said, we're having this problem with problematic anger. It's impacting our operations. We turned then to Grit and said, well, why don't we, Grit Digital Health, this solution, put together a military, academic, industry partnership to address this problem. And so we're working with Grit Digital Health and Cactus now, again, Colorado-based companies, to develop an augmented anger management platform, digital solution, and then test that with soldiers at Fort Carson down the road. That's one example of a digital health solution that we're working on. A few months ago, JAMA Psychiatry had reached out and invited us to contribute a viewpoint on what do we see as the future of military suicide prevention. To be sure, digital health was part of that. I had the honor of co-authoring this with Dr. Babarda and Miss Ellen Embry. Miss Embry was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, the top official within DoD for healthcare matters during part of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, had that firsthand knowledge of what is needed to keep our service members safe. In this article, we talk not just about digital solutions such as what you saw with the Man Therapy platform, but also digital solutions we're working on in artificial intelligence, how to harness AI and machine learning and other approaches to detect service members and first responders at risk for PTSD, to detect service members and first responders in our community at risk for suicide so that we can target some interventions and get them the help they deserve. I've mentioned a few times our focus is heavy on the military service members. It's also heavy on the civilian first responders, many of whom have prior military service. We also focus on the military families, the psychological health of the entire family unit, because we know that doing so creates not just a stronger military, but a stronger community, including here in Colorado. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'm gonna pass to Dr. Guinday.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. I hope you are as inspired by this content as I am. I've heard these speakers speak probably dozens of times. Every single time I get something more out of it, and I feel it's very difficult to sit in that chair because I want to get up and start acting, and that's what we're hoping to inspire and instill here. Thank you to Chancellor Elliman for highlighting this work in military and veteran health. My name is Adit Guinday. I'm an emergency medicine physician here on campus at UC Health. I've led the research programs for emergency medicine and now leading clinical research for the School of Medicine and clinical trials for the campus. And I've been involved with the Combat Center from the beginning as an executive committee member in leading clinical trials for the Combat Center. I'm gonna bring it back around to what Dr. Babarda said at the beginning, which is how does a civilian infrastructure really lean in to answer these tough military questions? How do I personally, as a civilian scientist, engage with the military and answer these questions and become a destination for this clinical trial work? So I'm gonna start with a short personal story, which is my roots and how I got to this point. So these are my two grandfathers, who were in India. On the left, Dr. R.G. Guinday was the original neurosurgeon, basically the pioneer of the field in India, brought with him this motivation, excellence, innovation to sort of bring this specialty there. My other grandfather on the right, Mr. Harilal Mahimthura, an attorney who basically exited his practice and joined Gandhi in the freedom fight. And we have lots of newspaper clippings of him in jail with Gandhi, marching, nonviolent protests. I'm not saying that part was instilled in me, but it's really about this work ethic, this commitment to excellence, this mission and passion for answering questions, and for serving the public. And that could be the civilian public, that could be our military as well. So I took that with me, took those roots with me. So went to medical school, Washington University in St. Louis, and got there and was pretty antsy originally because it's like, I'm just supposed to sit here and learn. I feel like I'm supposed to be doing something already. So partnered with the American Red Cross and started a community CPR and first aid program, partnered with American Lung Association and started a smoking cessation program, did a community-led testing program. It was this desire to make a difference as much and as soon in the way that I knew how that was really driving from my background. And then came here. I've been faculty here for 18 years. And my role here has really been in clinical care, but also in research and in clinical trials. And we'll talk a little bit about how that has led to military medicine. So originally, I was here before Dr. Bobarda and Dr. Flaherty arrived, was very happy in my world of civilian science, NIH funding, doing clinical trials that I thought and were, making a difference. But then along came the Combat Center, and this was actually before the Combat Center formed. And, we had questions on the civilian side and the scientific community. Our discovery scientists and basic scientists had great ideas. We were bringing it into clinical practice and testing it in the clinical environment. And it was kind of making a difference, but it was not palpable, and it was just taking too long. And then, Dr. Bobarda, Dr. Flaherty would say, hey, your science actually really blends well with military questions. And so that's really sort of the foundation of what the Combat Center does. It's like, what do we do here? What is our expertise? And how do we blend that with what the military needs? And it's different. A lot of universities, it's the civilian scientist at the point, and it's here's what we want to do and fund it for us. For us here, it is what is the military's tough questions? What can we do to serve our military service members and treating them, and then how that sort of plays into our expertise here. So this is a general diagram of science, and science from its beginning, critically important, making discoveries, new treatments, new solutions. We are not fast enough, and not enough of our science actually makes a difference to patient care and patient lives. So this is a common diagram. It can take more than 17 years for a tiny fraction of the work that we do in science to actually make a difference in influencing patient care. And that's just not good enough. And that's where the partnership with the military matters, because their questions are now. We are constantly preparing for the next conflict. Sometimes we are in active conflict. We don't have the luxury of waiting, and nor do our civilian patients, by the way. They need these solutions now. And there's these, cycles of funding and doing studies, and then studies fail and you start from the beginning. We have really tried to focus on how do we speed this up. And so how do we do this in clinical research and clinical trials? So it's really, we take things the last mile in clinical trials. So discoveries are made, solutions are proposed, but we need to know whether it works in patients and in populations. So that's what we do in clinical trials. We test new treatments or old treatments for new conditions. We bring in our expertise in clinical trial design. So there's lots of different ways to do this from a scientific method standpoint. And we look at how do we do this as fast, as efficient, and as valid as possible to get these answers quickly. We coordinate, we have networks around the country and around the world to do this work. They're now swimming in the same direction. They care greatly about the mission of military medicine and bringing these projects back home to their institutions as well. Complete the studies quickly and effectively, and then disseminate the results. That last mile is critically important. It doesn't make any difference if you publish a high impact paper if nobody changes their practice. You've got to get the word out so that you can make a difference to the patients that we're trying to serve. So here's one example. So this project was really before the Combat Center started, was sort of an initial project. We had a concept in critically ill and injured patients scientifically that we were giving people way too much oxygen. So it sounds very benign. Somebody's bleeding, they're losing blood, blood carries oxygen. We should give them a lot of oxygen. That's how we care for patients across the country. But there's science and data that would suggest actually giving too much oxygen can be harmful. So we brought in a group from the Air Force, Special Operations Group, and they said, I don't even care if you make people better. If you can maintain outcomes and give people less oxygen, that's gonna make a huge difference for the operation, because we have to carry this oxygen on the battlefield. It's expensive, it's explosive. We can't care for the patients because we have to give everyone high flow oxygen. What we found, 8 trauma centers, including here around the country, 13,000 patients, that actually giving people less oxygen, not too little, but definitely not too much, saved oxygen, but also saved lives and got people out of the hospital and home sooner. So I'm gonna play a video that was actually created. This work was highlighted by the military at the conference and won an award for best research team for the Combat Center and for our group. And
we have to provide a lot of logistics downrange for military medicine, and the less we have to carry downrange for a long time, such as a prolonged casualty care environment or large-scale combat operations, the better. Oxygen is heavy, it had risks, and it's expensive to try and deliver that oxygen for a long time at a high flow. If we can reduce the amount of oxygen delivered, period, and give patients less, only to the ones who need it, it makes our footprint lighter and safer for our patients and our teams downrange.
Delivering oxygen, delivering adequate oxygen is actually one of the things that greatly challenges the logistics people in terms of mission planning.
We have cylinders of oxygen, and once that cylinder is empty, you've got to get refill from some other base, which may be, miles, hundreds of miles away, maybe several hours flight by helicopter. So once you burn through the oxygen cylinder, your oxygen supply is gone.
The idea in the SAVO2 trial is to look at the amount of supplemental oxygen that these critically injured patients need, what's the optimal amount to improve their outcomes, and also what is the least that they need, because conserving oxygen in certain settings can have a lot of importance logistically.
So target normoxia is when we reduce the amount of oxygen to what you need and nothing more. So not getting it too low where it's unsafe, but not giving excessive oxygen where it may be harmful to the body.
Oxygen is really just like any other drug. So, you can have too little of it, you can have too much of it. So targeting normoxemia is actually trying to find the middle ground. So in our context, an oxygen saturation of 90 to 96% is what we targeted for the clinical trial. The clinical trial showed improvement in the number of days alive and without supplemental oxygen. It showed a reduction of about 1.5 days of hospital length of stay. We actually saw that survival in the patients that received the SAVO2 intervention also improved. Again, this is a large multi-center clinical trial. In the trauma trial, we had over 10,000 patients. So this is the largest and most definitive results in a trauma population.
In this relatively short time frame of roughly 5 to 6 years, we've taken it just from an idea that we were talking about in the back of a napkin all the way through something that is ready for implementation into a clinical practice guideline.
Because patient outcomes are actually improved, now we can definitively say that there's no longer a need to provide high amounts of supplemental oxygen for most critically injured and burned patients. That's a big paradigm shift. So this is a very simple concept. We're just turning a knob on oxygen, but can actually make a difference in people's lives. And this came from the Combat Center, from our connections with military leaders through the Combat Center to really focus the science as well as the operational need. And so the military is fairly blown away by this. It's very difficult to complete clinical trials. Often they don't finish on time or finish at all. They often don't show the results that was hoped. And so, we continued this collaboration with the military. We're now, up to 10 clinical trials, over 40 publications in these clinical trials, often in high impact journals, New England Journal, JAMA. But really what we're most proud about is this CPG, this clinical practice guideline. So this is, again, taking the results and changing the way that we care for patients. And so with this trial, with our work in airway management for those that are having difficulty bleeding, for transfusion and resuscitation, for infection, we have been able to influence and change a dozen clinical practice guidelines for the military and the civilian side as well. There's a number of clinical guidelines for civilian care that also have been changed as a result of this work. So it's really both. And so we became, had some notoriety in these clinical trials, and the military came to us, came to the Combat Center, came to our clinical trials group and said, love the work you're doing. We need you to help with some tough challenges in Ukraine. And the first reaction is, we don't really do work in Ukraine. I don't really know exactly how we're gonna do this. But we, really wanted to step up. We had partners in some of our global networks, and we were able to stand up infrastructure in just a few months. Their initial question was on antibiotic-resistant infections. This is a huge global health challenge, these superbugs. And so we were able to, build infrastructure, this was sort of our final exam of clinical trials, how to do this, across the ocean, but in an active war zone, and stood this up, launched this. There's already been over 60 patients enrolled at 3 sites just in a couple months. And this is just, this is the way that now we are interfacing with the military, which is we have a capability and they come to the combat center. Our combat centers become a destination to be able to answer these tough questions that really nobody else in the country, nobody else in the world can do. And so this is just about bringing things together. So we're bringing together our knowledge and content and scientific expertise, our ability to execute, our partnerships around the country and around the world, who are very inspired by this work, and then bring this to the battlefield, bring this to our civilian hospitals. Often, it's civilian hospitals that are testing. It's got to be important there as well. It's got to be just as important to UC Health and our patients here as it is to the medic and the injured soldier on the battlefield. And that's the approach that we take in answering these questions. And so that is the meaning of this work. For me as a civilian scientist, it's incredibly inspiring to be a part of this work. I never thought in a million years that I would be in this zone meeting with military generals, answering these questions, working with Ukraine in the middle of a war on infection research. It's a real honor. I mean, I was not a colonel or a general like Dr. Babarda and Dr. Flaherty have been. This is really my way of serving. This is my version of patriotism, that I can serve my country and our men and women in uniform through clinical research, through clinical trials, and it's been a great honor. So thank you. And I think we are now going to the discussion and Q&A, so we're looking forward to it.
So this is actually the best part. We're going to bring up some chairs, and then we're going to bring all these experts up for Q&A and questions for everyone to ask. I think it's the best part of these events as well. So, perfect. So a couple rules of engagement. We'll ask any question you want of the team here. We'll have a couple of mics. I think Megan will have a mic, and then Neil Kraus in the back will have a mic. And while everyone's getting warmed up, I'll just start off with a question for the team here. All of you one fantastic job today. And I know all of you see patients, have been on military bases, and to continue to bridge that continuum between military and civilian, all the trials that you do, some include service members, some include veterans, but some are civilians completely. Can you speak to that? Like that it's okay to have civilians and studies that benefit the military, that connection? Maybe Adit?
Yeah, no, I'll start. It's actually, we enroll these patients in our civilian hospitals and talk about how the military is supporting this research and how this benefits the military. And there is incredible enthusiasm. These are volunteers for clinical trials. That degree of being able to participate in a clinical trial and serve science, but also serve our military has been a really gratifying part of this, to see how important it is to our patients to be able to be a part of this work as well.
Great.
Can you address how the atmosphere in our country right now and the changes to funding for research are impacting you?
Sure, I'll lead up with that. Thanks. We always talk about researchers. They're all pretty gritty, always trying to find opportunity for funding and whatnot. For the work that we're doing, there's new challenges, of course, this year. Seems like there's always some challenges. I think what we have done is focused on the center, the institute in particular, around being agile and around focusing how do we get after the patient problem and where can that be resourced from. Maybe it's DOD, maybe it's NIH, maybe it's industry, maybe it's philanthropy, and try and get after those opportunities. You guys have thoughts as well?
Yeah, I think it's about being nimble and flexible and somewhat opportunistic. You know, we're trying to serve, we're trying to advance science. Things change, things always change. It's been, you know, the pace of change has been a little different recently. So I think it's, you know, it's being flexible and broadening the portfolio. Philanthropy is a huge part of it. Industry partnerships, government partnerships as well, really important.
And also the university leadership, you know, giving us that ability to continue our persistence in pushing forward and still putting in those grants and saying, don't stop, keep doing your work. And so we thank Chancellor for that.
And Dr. Ian Stanley, the one he talked about, demand therapy to have scalable for military, I think a lot of the work that we do is a priority for the DoD and for the nation as a whole. So we've been pleased with our level of support continuing. But it's, you know, you never know, so we're agile.
Yeah.
Have another one here.
Thank you all for an extraordinary presentation and really appreciated it. Hearing about the work and the cutting edge work you're doing on traumatic brain injury, and also how it initially was somewhat doubted as being a physiological effect, and then how research has emerged, I couldn't help but think about the issue that we're dealing with in another respect about pulsed radiofrequency radiation or energy, and you know, sometimes known as the Havana syndrome. And I wondered, it seems to me that a lot of the resources and investigational work and rehabilitation work that you've been doing with traumatic brain injury might be translatable to that. And I wonder if that's something that your institutes and centers have dealt with.
I can speak to you a little bit. What Dr. Cosden's talking about is the Havana syndrome and also directed energy as well, as they call it. I'll answer a little bit and then maybe I'll transition over to talking about blast injury. But that specific issue that has been described, we don't study here. It's kind of hard to replicate the Havana syndrome that occurred. And directed energy is a particular type of effect on the body that's delivered offensively, and that's mostly that work is classified. So I can't tell you about it. No, but it's.
But it'd have to kill you.
Yeah, we don't do classified work on this campus, but other groups, that military units do that for sure. But it does bring back a conversation around blast injury. I know you all have done a lot of that with the Army Rangers. I don't know if you can speak to blast injury specifically, unique.
Yeah, and I described a little bit about that in my, and I also have direct application, because when you think about that repetitive blast injury, you still get that, like the football player, concussion after concussion after concussion. So there's lots of application across the system, but we're still in our infancy, and we have some mice models and some other models that we're looking at for the repetitive blast injury and the overpressure. But the good thing right now is it's in discussion, and the DoD and the world is looking at how can we mitigate it for our nation's heroes, because you can't take them all away. But I personally believe there's a lot of different things you can do for prevention and mitigation. We just need to figure it out and take care of them.
Yeah, I think it's all very similar. You also have to look at potentially more of a global insult to the entire system. And so it's not just the brain central nervous system, but potentially the autonomic nervous system. And how does that relate to that overpressure? We're starting to look into that scientifically, as well as just direct application of mitigation, because it's hitting the entire body.
Yeah, it's simple things, like we used to have, our helmets used to cover our ears. Well, to hear better, we opened up our ears, and then you get the blast wave through the ears. So it's just, and the mortarmen, how they turn away, you know, from the blast. So maybe their ears are protected, but not their cerebellum, and different brain stems and different pieces. So it's really looking at the mechanics of it. And so it takes a village to do that. Yeah. And we're lucky we have the connections in military. We're lucky that we have the military and industry and academic partnerships that we can actually work together to bring the right players in.
Thank you. This is great, and this is a question for Ian, if you're willing to divulge some information. But could you speak to some of the AI technologies that you're using to prevent PTSD or in PTSD treatments?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Murrow. We're working right now, actually, this week on putting together, for the Navy, as said, we need to understand how to predict PTSD. We have all of this data. We need to leverage AI to predict PTSD. And so some of it is directly responding to some of those requests. Some of it is using machine learning to figure out among the tens of thousands of soldiers, for instance, in one area, who is at risk for attempting suicide. I talked a lot about suicide mortality, but we know suicide attempts can disrupt people's lives, not just the medical consequences, but the time away. And developing these algorithms to figure out where should limited resources, the military health system, just like the civilian system, has limited behavioral health clinicians. And so we can't I heard someone once say, we can't clinic our way out of the problem. And so how do we efficiently allocate resources to them? Those are the types of things we're working on.
Can you give us some idea about how large the problem is in any branch of the armed forces that PSD plays? For example, what percentage of combat troops, let's say in Army, come back or are affected by PTSD?
Yeah, it's a great question. The question was about the scope of the problem of PTSD, and particularly across the different branches. We know that in the general population, about 8% of people have a lifetime prevalence of PTSD. In the military, that's up to about 25%, depending on kind of where you look. Combat exposure can definitely increase that. Whether or not there's differences by military branch, that I'm not sure. I will share that for rates of suicide, which are of course linked with PTSD, we see rates higher in the Marines and higher in the Army compared with the Navy and the Air Force, and we don't yet know, there's not enough data for the Space Force. And those rates are about 50% higher in the Marines and Army, and so PTSD might be in part driving that.
I do want to add one point. We talk about this, it happens around Veterans Day, and there's a lot of focus on veterans who are disabled or challenged. To your question, is that it's important to understand that the overwhelming majority of folks that serve do quite well. And they're actually executives and leaders and chairs and chairmen and chairwomen and are in Congress and whatnot. And the minority of them do have challenges in this area. We should address that. But be sure that the majority of them do quite well and are leaders in our communities as well.
We have time for one more question.
My question has to do with, is there value in a quick traumatic brain injury, let's say it's mild or medium, a quick diagnosis? Because most of what you talked about had to do with the behavioral things, lack of not being able to sleep or anger management and things like that. But I'm just wondering what the technique is for a quick diagnosis other than what I see on the sideline of NFL games. And is there value in it or is it not? In most cases, does it wait for the behavioral things that were discussed?
And I apologize if it is misleading that it's more behavioral, because there's cognitive, so many cognitive pieces. There's so many emotional pieces and physical, the ocular motor and the vestibular, the balance. So there's a lot of different components to that. The majority of people with their concussion, which is a mild traumatic brain injury, will recover within a short period of time. But there's a recent study that came out that about 50% that come back to the ED within 6 months have continued symptoms. And so for that quick one, there's a lot of different studies that are looking at like biomarkers, because there are biomarkers that you can look at. Same thing for downrange, because it'd be really nice to know for that combat medic, do I pull you out of play for 3 days or what? So those tools are being improved and perfected, as well as additional diagnostic that you can use earlier. The labeling is really, that will also, I think, will improve with assessment processes.
Yeah, I mean, right now they're standardized in the field, so on the field by an athletic trainer or a medic in the field of combat. But they're imperfect, as many tools are. They're quite subjective, so the tester has to then interpret those findings. What we're trying to get to is a lot more objective measures and quick, so field expedient, so it actually can be done quickly to determine, can you stay in the fight, can you stay in the game or not, is because it's that second impact, third impact that can be the most damaging. So you're absolutely correct. At the point of injury, we need better tools, objective tools that definitively say you have a concussion, but maybe at what level. So thank you for that question.
And it's also important to think about like our cultures, right? So the football player doesn't want to be pulled, right? And the soldier doesn't want to be pulled. And so a lot of times that's changing the culture, that's educating that, you shot off 100 mortars, maybe we should pull you out for a little bit, you're having these symptoms. I mean, there used to be not the ability to show the chink in your armor or weakness, right? And even just educating, because that education is really important to help mitigate it in all realms, right? Our kids and our colleagues and our communities, but definitely with our soldiers, because to shoot that mortar, if you've ever been around your chest, you get this percussion, you get this feeling, right? And for some of that comes with the pride of it, right? I'm making a difference instead of knowing, well, maybe 100 a day is too many, or even the training, that's too much. You're having symptoms. You need to come and talk to the medic.
Yeah, and there are folks on this campus in the Center of the Institute and other researchers that are looking for point-of-care, data-driven, or wearable diagnostics to determine if you have a concussion or brain injury. Great researchers here doing that work.
And we're actually partnering and consulting and contributing to some of the practice guidelines for units in the Navy, units in the Army, to help them identify what should be used more acutely, and then how can we help them in more chronic stage of the injury. So we're trying to get there right now in the military, but obviously in the civilian space would be fantastic as well.
Thank you very much. How about a round of applause for all of our speakers?
Way to go, team.
Before we officially close tonight's program, I have the honor of introducing a final speaker or speakers. Please join me in welcoming Eliseo Gonzalez and Grace Eddy for a special announcement on behalf of Colorado Congressman Gabe Evans.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Eliseo Gonzalez.
I'm Grace Eddy.
And we're here from the office of Congressman Gabe Evans, representing Colorado's 8th Congressional District. Congressman Gabe Evans sends his regards. He wished he could be here tonight. Unfortunately, he cannot. He is currently in Washington, D.C. However, that does give Grace, my colleague, and I the honor and the pleasure of reading and presenting the following congressional record read on the House floor of the United States Congress in Washington, D.C., June 3rd of 2025, titled, Honoring the CU Center for Combat and Battlefield Research and Marcus Institute for Brain Health. And it reads as follows. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the Center for Combat and Battlefield Research and the Marcus Institute for Brain Health at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus in Aurora, Colorado. I honor their commitment to improving the health of our military, veterans, and first responders.
The MIBH is a global leader in brain injury research and healthcare delivery, providing individualized, innovative brain healthcare for our nation's heroes. To this date, the MIBH has served over 1,200 of our nation's heroes, including over 1,000 veterans, establishing a course of treatment for physical, emotional, and cognitive changes that can accompany brain trauma in these individuals. In 2025, the MIBH is expected to serve another 300 patients, including active duty military and first responders. Since its founding in 2019, the CU Combat Center has grown into the largest military medicine-focused research center, charged with solving our warfighters' toughest medical challenges through high-impact research, education, and innovation. Due to their work, the military has updated 14 clinical practice guidelines, including defining optimal oxygen delivery targets. It is continuing to lead efforts in clinical trials to identify, test, and evaluate autonomous medical devices for pre-hospital use, such as autonomous oxygen titration, to improve military medical capability and capacity. Not only does the Combat Center drive innovation to improve outcomes for physical injury and trauma, it is a national leader in advancing psychological health and readiness. Combat investigators have contributed to federal and DoD policy, instructions, and programs to reduce suicide among service members, first responders, and their families.
As a veteran and former first responder, I know that the research, innovation, and clinical work that the Combat Center and MIBH conducts are critical for caring for veterans, active duty military personnel, and first responders who risk their lives daily for their communities. I am proud to honor the care and medical research being led by the CU Combat Center and MIBH and thank them for their service to Colorado and to our nation. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you so much. We appreciate Congressman Evans and you all and that recognition. And I know, and Chancellor Ellman, thank you so much for the honor for having let us share with you how we're transforming healthcare for this community.
Thanks.
We open it? Wait, let's go.
We often say on this campus that we're in the business of hope. And these people represent that mission as well as anybody I could possibly imagine. So thank you for joining us tonight. Please enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you for coming. Good job. That was amazing. Good job.